Hello, everyone, and welcome to another MSP event. We're super excited to get started and talk about the topic today. World-class contract management starts with good data analysis with our expert panelists today. As you all know, I love to start things off with a fun icebreaker as we let folks trickle in. So I like to kick things off with the question, what plans do you have for the holiday season? And I will kick things off to Michelle, and then you can popcorn it over.
I love that. Thank you, Angelica. So our holidays this year look a little bit different than normal. I don't even know if I've told you guys yet, but I'm actually 7 months pregnant, and
Congratulations.
thank you, thank you. So these holidays, while spent with family, and we have a 3-year-old son, we'll be spending a lot of time with family, but it's also getting ready for our second son that's coming in February. So it'll be a lot of like unpacking of stuff, reorganizing, getting ready for a baby in the house, which I can't even remember what that's like. So spending lots of time with family, but also getting so prepared for our lives to be upside down soon.
That's amazing. Well, congratulations again.
Thank you.
Um, Colin, what about you?
Yeah, so we uh, are just going to have a small sort of little get together with my in-laws who I get along with really well, thankfully. So that should be fun, like we did last year, because we tried to do a big Thanksgiving this year, and that turned into a complete COVID disaster.
No.
So we're kind of not going to be doing any more big get-togethers, I think, until um, COVID becomes a little less intrusive into our lives.
Yeah.
And Shanna?
Yeah, so this year I'm gonna spend it with my dog Teddy, and we're gonna probably do another pop run. I think it's nice to be able to like mark the occasion, make a little print with him.
Oh, that's so
That's
cute. What kind
wonderful.
of dog do you have?
A Cavapoo, so he's a mixture of a Cavalier and a Poodle.
Very cute. Well, thank you everyone for sharing your holiday plans. And everyone who is tuning in, I love to know where you're calling in from. So use the public chat and state where country, state, or province, if you're from Canada, that you're calling in from. And now let's get started. Today's event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them to see around corners they may not know about. We do this through live sessions like the one you're at today. We also have an online forum and our quarterly summits, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And also, we're starting to get back into in person events, so stay tuned when we might come to a city near you. Speaking of our summit, I'm super excited to announce that we're back with another virtual Modern Sales Pros Revenue Excellence Summit. Join us for the Mega SKO January 24th to the 26th, aka next month. We have over 20 plus events with 5,000 modern sales pros in attendance, 60 plus high caliber speakers, hear from leaders at Drift, Sales Loft, Lean Data, Stage 2 Capital, plus so much more. Don't miss out and sign up today. I'm actually going to drop the registration link in the chat, so definitely check us out and sign up. Next, I'm super pleased to announce our sponsor for today's event, Melbeck. Melbeck provides a modern cloud-based contract management solution with a user experience that delights. Sales, legal, finance, and procurement teams can all achieve contracting efficiencies. See it for yourself and check out their link right here. They're doing amazing stuff. Now, before I pass it off to our amazing expert speakers that we have on the panel today, I'm going to do some quick housekeeping notes. This event is going to be recorded, so don't worry if you have a colleague or friend that couldn't make it. The recording and key takeaways will be made available on the MSP previous event page before the end of the day, Pacific time. And then if you have a question for our panelists, please use the Q&A function at the top right-hand corner that says Q&A, or leverage the chat and ask your questions there, and we'll be sure to answer them live. Now, without further ado, I am super excited to pass things off to our moderator, Michelle, to kick introductions off, and then I will come back during the closing remarks to wrap things up. Michelle, take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's really nice to virtually meet everyone today. I hope everyone's having a great day so far. Like Angelica mentioned, use the chat. So comments, thoughts, questions as they come up. I'm happy to hear even what holiday plans you guys have. So please use the Q&A, use the chat. Let us know what you're thinking so we can make this more interactive. As Angelica mentioned, I'm Michelle Oak. I'm the Director of Enterprise Sales at Loopio. So for those of you not familiar with Loopio, we are a response software that makes submitting high quality RFPs, due diligence questionnaires, and security questionnaires faster and easier. I manage our enterprise full cycle sales team that's composed of our business development function as well as our account executives. While I've spent the last year at Loopio, prior to that, I spent the last 10 years at a company called Cision, also SaaS organization in the PR space, most recently managing their enterprise team. I spent most of my sales career there over the last few years. It's nice to meet everyone today. Thank you so much for joining us. Colin, would love to get an introduction.
Thanks, Michelle. Happy to be here. My name is Colin Levy. I am Director of Legal for Malbec, which is a leading contract lifecycle management company. And I have been a lawyer in the tech space for over a decade, primarily focused on SaaS. And I'm really excited to be here because I love working with sales and I love helping the sales team succeed. That's largely been my focus. In part because I've been working in-house, and when you're an in-house lawyer, you're basically on the front lines of the business, which is a lot of fun. And I can't wait to speak more about that during the course of this webinar.
Thank you, Colin. Channa?
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm Channa. I'm the VP of Revenue Operations at Inkling, and what we do is provide software that helps frontline workers in getting information on what they need when they need it at work, at the flow of work, sorry. And I also manage our RevOps team, and really what we're focusing on is how can we really support our go-to-market teams in process, tools, and insights as we grow and retain revenue.
Thanks, Channa. Everyone, I'm really excited to dig into our topic today. I think it's something that's probably really top of mind for all of us as we're closing out Q4 and planning for 2023. I'm sure the themes we'll cover today are top of mind for all of us in the virtual Zoom room, we'll call it. There's so many demands put on our revenue operations team from across the organization. It honestly can feel like a numbers game. Sales, customer success teams are constantly looking for insights into how long do deals typically take to close, how fast are things moving through the funnel, what's our conversion rate, our average sales price. The list goes on. Our demands are so long. I know my revenue operations team is already sick of me, but we've got so many demands that we're putting on them. Today, we're going to talk through some of these reporting challenges from a few different angles. As you just heard, Colin's coming to us from a legal background. I'll share some perspective from sales. And then Channa, of course, our revenue operations expert, is going to sort of put her hat on there and help us talk through this. One of the themes you'll also hear, Malbec, who's our great sponsor, will be introducing you to a contract lifecycle management solution as well. So a living, breathing contract record that will help you leverage contract data when you need it the most to improve business outcomes. So if anyone in the audience, again, is using a contract management tool today, would love to hear it. So please put it in the chat. Would love to hear what you're doing with your contract record today. So let us know. Let's dig in. I think in order to provide context for everyone around our discussion, I'd love to get a feel for how each of your organizations are set up today. So Colin, let's start with you. I'd love to hear about Malbec's current setup as it relates to contract management and reporting. I'm assuming you're drinking your own Kool-Aid, so to say. So we'd love to hear a little bit about how that works today.
Absolutely. Indeed, we are drinking our own Kool-Aid. For some reason, I never really liked that phrase. I don't know, maybe because I just wasn't a big Kool-Aid fan growing up, call me weird. But in any event, yes, we do use our own solution. And really, I think one of the most effective aspects of it is not just that you have a living, breathing, dynamically updated contract record for every deal, meaning all the contract documents and associated workflows, but the fact that you can go through the tool and have sales and finance and all these other departments work on the matter together asynchronously, meaning, whatever time zone someone is in, they can go in, see what's been done and work on it and leave comments, i.e. tag people that will send a notice to someone saying, hey, so-and-so over in whatever department, I need you to take a look at this clause, or I need you to look at this, SOW, I think there's something funky about it, or double check the financing terms because I think there's something a little weird, or what have you. And that kind of collaboration really allows for effective, I think, cross-functional working, and allows for companies to do things faster because they're waiting less on a response from someone from, via email, or waiting for, someone to clarify something they said in an email, where you can clarify dynamically in the system itself. And not to mention the fact that you're avoiding email altogether by having the contract and the communication all in one place. So you can kind of see exactly what's happened, along with what documents been added and be changed and by whom, which is really helpful in the event that something gets screwed up. You can see, all right, who last touched it, what happened, and work backwards from there.
And then, I think there's a bit of an echo. Maybe Chana, that's from you. Colin, how does that plug into your CRM then? Does your CRM and your Malbec platform talk to each other two-way?
Absolutely. That's one of the key aspects of having a CRM, is the fact that it ties directly into the CRM, meaning you have data flow that is dynamically updated, and there is no kind of tech stack that's not really working effectively as one solution. And I think that's really important. Something that more folks should understand is that when you are looking at a CRM tool, you really want to make sure that it fits into your existing tech stack. So you're not kind of having to reinvent the wheel. And when you add a new tool to your tech stack, you're really just kind of making your tech stack even better by adding additional functionality.
Yeah, perfect. Chana, over to you. Would love for you to walk us through, what is the contract management and reporting structure at Inkling?
Yeah, definitely. And I was thinking what Colin just mentioned too about how being able to connect to Salesforce and CLM. And so one thing I just thought about is the fact that we use our deal desk in terms of like structure to actually manage the exceptions. And so 80% of our contracts, reps are able to send them without the need to involve ops for approval and us being a blocker. But I think that's because what we're doing is trying to create a process, right, that bridges that gap from the contract creation, which right now happens outside of Salesforce, and even like the languaging, right, and how we work with our legal team and the terms that are managed, because that's outside of Salesforce and done unfortunately in a Google Doc. And so then in Salesforce, once they start the contracting process for the draft and approval process, that all goes into Salesforce, and we're using the contract management pieces of the contracts and assets to look at what we're upselling, as well as like what we're renewing for products.
That's great. Thank you. So for everyone's perspective in the room today, at Loopio, we are similar to Chana. We're doing everything outside of Salesforce. We don't have a contract management solution in place. So we use Salesforce as our CRM, and that's where we house a lot of our unique terms. We might house some of the customer data there, but then we're doing a lot of our contracting process through email, Google Drive, Google Docs, etc. As well. For both of you, maybe Colin first, how closely is your RevOps team integrated with your contracting function at Malbec?
So everything is, we work very closely with one another, primarily because we're a small team. So we don't have sort of a specific RevOps function, but we have a sales ops function, and we work, very closely together all through the platform to ensure that everyone is working on the same thing together. And that's really, really quite effective. And really, I find that because we work so effectively together, because we can all communicate through the platform, there's less email back and forth, which really means that I have less in my inbox to kind of keep track of, not to mention, trying to dig through emails and figure out, subject line doesn't match subject, what the email is talking about, and all those kinds of common issues. So it really works pretty effectively, not to mention the fact that if someone has a question about the status of a current deal or what have you, they can just go into the system and see what has happened. And they also will get notifications if they would like to through the system, which allows for pretty easy dynamic updates to be sent out if they would like to receive them.
So we don't have to email the legal team 300 times a day,
Right.
like Anna and I probably have to. I think the legal team is like so tired of us in sales, especially, I don't know about your organizations, if Q4 is the busiest time, but for us, it's the peak of when we see the most number of new contracts come into the business, as well as obviously because over time we gather the most number of customer renewals as well. One of the challenges that that I know people are trying to solve is how to keep track of these customer obligations. So we negotiate these different deals for each of our customers, big and small. We house a lot of it in our CRM tool today. But how easy is it? Again, for both, the question goes to either of you. How easy is it for your sales and customer service teams to quickly access this information when required? Maybe Channa, you can start first from the Salesforce function. Are you using your CRM to house all of that sort of unique customer information as it relates to contracting? And how do you sort of translate and change this content over time?
That's a great question. So I think one of the things that we started doing and implementing is actually being able to use asset tracking in Salesforce, and then being able to, on the opportunity level and also on the account level. I'm sure other people run into this where, the opportunity with when the deal is executed and the special terms are there, and then having to translate that back into the customer record. And so that's how we're tracking it over time, is being able to do a one-time track and the opportunity when it's closed won, and then being able to look at that at the customer level. Because again, for our CS team, for example, we use Gainsight, and so they not only want to be able to see it in Salesforce, but where they're actually working with their customers and looking at the insights in Gainsight as well.
Thank you. Colin, I'm eager to get your perspective on this. Thinking about the contract management tool, how does that play into some of these big RevOps initiatives as it relates to tracking customer contracts over time?
Yeah, one of the key aspects of having a CLM in place is you can track deal cycles and deal cycle times, meaning you can see how long it takes to go from sort of initial discussions to negotiation to actually closing the deal and executing. And for us, that's really important. And I would think it's pretty important for most functions. So you can kind of see, obviously the more complex deals tend to take longer, but you can also in the tools see kind of what aspects of the deal took longer than other ones, whether it was negotiating over certain provisions, whether it was finance terms, putting together the SOW, what have you. And so that kind of level of granular data, I think, can be very, very effective for being able to figure out how you can facilitate a quicker sales cycle on your side. Because obviously there are things you can't control that are on the customer side in terms of them getting their act together, getting the right approvals, all that stuff that we've all seen and been through a million times before.
Mm-hmm.
But on your side, whatever you want, whatever you can control, you want to take full advantage of, and using that kind of data analysis you can through having a tool like this in place. And so it's really effective. And I would say, yes, I'm representing Malbec, but also quite frankly, any type of CLM tool for the most part, a good one at least, should be able to provide this level of data analysis that really, I think, can be a game changer for a lot of companies.
I think that's so interesting too, especially if you think about if we can track the initial uplift from that initial contract signing, whenever we get to renewal period, now we have a baseline to work off of. Because I don't think we're tracking that information necessarily effectively today at my organization. Channa, are you tracking that today? Sort of how long things typically take from hurdles?
So I was actually just taking note of that I thought it was also an interesting point, because normally you see that when you're doing like outbound and new business, from like the cold outreach to the first engagement. And so we're doing it from when you open the creation of the opportunity for renewals, but that's essentially only just based off of like you need to reach out to them and get them to renew before the opt-out date, or reach out 60 days, right? So that they're aware of the renewal. But being able to understand who's engaging for the contract and renewals, and is that person like the previous economic buyer, would be interesting to be able to look at. We are not looking at that today, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Thank you, Channa. Super interesting. I feel like I'm learning so much just from this conversation too. And again, like I was saying, really topical. As we go into the next portion of this discussion, let's start with measuring the contract cycle as it relates to new contracts. So let's focus on brand new contract cycles. This is a really hot topic at Lupio right now as we scale. As I mentioned, Q4 sees the most number of new contracts being negotiated, so many renewals that are coming in, putting pressure on RevOps, Deal Desk, on our contracts team. We're consistently trying to shorten our contracting negotiation cycle, and then again, managing commercial terms. Maybe what I'll ask you, Channa, is how's your team maintaining that contract record today? So I want to get some insight into the contracting side of things. How closely does your Deal Desk or RevOps team work with contracting? And then how are they managing their contract record, turnaround times, et cetera?
Yeah, so we manage 80% of it. It's just standardized terms. So when I think about the length of the contract, what we think about is from when the customer pays for new business deal, from the close date to the service start date to then the payment date, because ultimately we want to see how long it takes, right? So even though the opportunity closes, let's say this month, it starts next month, but they don't pay for another 90 days, we want to actually track like the end-to-end for payment for the procurement piece of this. To answer the original question, what I'm thinking about is the way that we track it is everything is standardized. And so we actually have a deal desk request in Salesforce for the other 20%, where if they need special terms or they need price negotiation. So we give reps, we empower them to actually be able to negotiate certain terms and thresholds without actually reaching out to myself to do contracting for them and helping them with it. And so they are standardized across the board outside of the 20% of snowflakes.
Is there any pain in the process today, Channa?
So we just actually implemented this because the pain was before, like you mentioned earlier, every contract I would actually have to help them draft it, create it, and help them send it out. And so we've rolled this out for the last couple of months to be able to alleviate two things. One, that gap between when I can respond if I'm at work to when they need the contract to the prospect. And then the second is just empowering reps to be able to, send a contract because it is standard terms, right? Because you want to get that deal across the line today. And so that the new pain, I think, is actually being able to proactively look at how long it takes between the economic buyer and who they're engaging with. And so that's what we're starting to talk about is like the idea of like, how can we actually look at the buying committee using our contract data and tracking that.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Colin, I'd love to take things from that legal point of view lens that you've got. Tell us about the contract record at Malbec. And I'm interested in like using a contract management solution and then now using a contract management solution, like how your life has changed from that like contracts legal point of view, the impact that it's had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've definitely been there. And it's been a struggle because at prior companies where I was often part of a small team or just frankly the only lawyer, it was a lot of Excel spreadsheets and a lot of random files, frankly, scattered over various places and manually creating email folders, which was not ideal and took time. So that was definitely tough. But one thing that I did at those companies and also was present here with Malbec as well is creating templates that are available through a dashboard or a portal for the sales team and other functions to be able to access. They then can send out and have our standard terms and what have you, and they can send out and get reviewed and then come back. And also I've engaged in training sales teams to understand kind of what are key what are key points for me that I hone in on, why I hone in on those, and what ones, you don't really even need to ask me about because they're just not huge issues for me. And that speeds up the cycle quite a bit. And then frankly, on those areas that do take a little bit more time to negotiate, I provide the sales team with some fallbacks to allow for them to provide their counterpart at our potential customer that information, and that can be done through the system, which is great as well. And I'm trying to do more, frankly, as well, because the more I can automate and more that I can avoid having them turn to me and provide an answer ad hoc, the better off I can be and be more productive and focus my time more on more strategic initiatives and less time on sort of these nitty-gritty questions, which is not to say that I don't enjoy them. I do, but I want to also be mindful of my time and how I'm spending my time. So having, a contract management solution in place allows for you to automate some of these things and create kind of a one source of truth with respect to your contractual documents and also your clauses and compromise language that most companies should have on hand with respect to particular painful provisions that they have in their agreements.
And I'm assuming you can customize that based on the deal size and any other kind of
Oh,
legal.
absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of different factors that kind of come into play with respect to negotiating a particular agreement, and certainly deal size is certainly one of them at times that comes into play for sure.
I love this idea of a toolbox because like that sales can leverage for, let's say, commonly negotiated terms or terms that we might always push back on and some reasons why. I think that's one of the challenges we have today, more on our commercial team. So I manage our enterprise team where our contracts team does look at every single contract pretty much in our enterprise space that comes in with Redline. So those have that customized experience, albeit I'm sure there's things we can do to shorten that cycle. Where we have challenges is on the commercial side, where we are under the threshold of legal negotiation. I think it'd be nice to house a toolkit for AEs to be able to say, like, here's why we're pushing back on these. Here's common ones that we can give on without having our contracts team put a lot of effort towards it, because today we're reading each one manually. Colin,
Right.
would you say to that point that there are some contracts you probably don't need to look at that can automate through the platform today?
Yeah, certainly there are certain types of contracts that I don't really need to be looking at, or even if I do look at, I don't have to spend a lot of time looking at, for sure. But to your earlier point about kind of empowering sales, that's one thing I really try to do as part of my job is empower sales, empower other functions, be able to do more. Which is not to say I don't want to build a relationship with them. Of course I do, but I also want to ensure that they don't have to wait on me all the time for certain things and they can continue to move forward, because that's really what they want to do. And my goal is to try to enable and support growth and grow revenue, while also protecting the business. And that's, a balance that can be achieved. But oftentimes you need the tools on hand to be able to achieve it. And, different tools like a CRM or CLM can, working particularly together, can really help with.
One of the challenges, I want to pick your brain on this, which might divert a little bit from this topic, but one of the challenges we also have today, we have all of our contracts that go up to our CFO for signature. And Shanna, maybe even getting your perspective on your process that doesn't involve a contract management tool would be interesting too, is they go up to our CFO for signature, and my CFO has to go back to legal in every single case to say, like, what was negotiated, were these terms approved? What are you doing today, Channa, to sort of track that as they go to your signatory for approval? What can you recommend to people that's working for you?
So what we've done is actually integrate DocuSign right into Salesforce. So the rep can send out the contract right from Salesforce. It will say it's from me to the prospect, to our CEO, and then to our prospect or customer. And then what I thought was interesting that you mentioned that is that we actually have two different signatures. So we have our CEO signs it for customers, but there are some parts of it when we're involved, like our partnerships, for example, where our CFO will then need to sign an additional order form for that piece of it. And so what we're doing is, and I guess it has got a little bit of blind faith, right? My expectation is that if it's gotten that far and they're sending it out, that like it's our standard contract with approval. And so then we do go back and look at it and do an audit. But I think that is also an area for improvement is, how can you better leverage our CRM or CLM to do that so it isn't a reactive, what did we actually say in the contract that we should probably not have said, that we did say.
Thank you. Colin, maybe tell us about, and then we'll move on to our sort of final piece of it. From the CLM perspective, what's the workflow look like today, typically when a contract has been agreed upon and goes out for signature, assuming that comes through the platform?
Absolutely. So one of the great elements of CLM and the solution is it integrates with signature tools like DocuSign or what have you. So all you have to do really is just advance it to that signature stage, put in the email addresses of those who need to sign, and then they get it sent to them, and they can go ahead and sign it. And then the system documents it, it gets back the fully signed record. So you're good to go. Now, of course, the tricky part with that is making sure that the person who is being sent to has signature authority to sign, which on our end is very clear. We have one person who, that person just signs things, and that's they have that authority. So on the customer side, oftentimes that can get a little tricky because they have different levels of who can sign what, sometimes even with double signatures. But that's perfectly fine because you have this solution that allows you to accommodate whatever the particular signing process is. And obviously that's an exciting time because at that point, the contract is good to go. At least you would hope it would be. But certainly it eases that sort of process, so you don't have to kind of individually email someone and have them figure out a way to sign it. They can just use the tool, sign it, and it's good to go, and you get it back and you're all set.
And you're getting this like pre-approved copy.
Yeah, I mean, right, exactly, because it's usually it's been looked at by me if it deviates from our standard terms, and I've approved it and gotten the approvals I need. So it's gone through all that. And again, you can document that in the system as well by tagging, hey, can you look at this? Can you approve it? Get their approval, and then you can push it forward.
And you're not playing Russian roulette with the contract.
Exactly.
Okay. So for the audience reminder, please ask your questions. We will be moving over to any questions that the audience has soon. So let us know if there's anything that sort of sparked any interest in what we've talked about today. The last piece that I want to touch on that I think is really interesting or important for or top of mind, I should say, is this idea of speeding up the contract review process. So we talked we talked a bit about the start, about just how long the contract review process can take. And when we talked backstage, we were talking about this like black hole. So today, if we're not using a CLM, we send things into legal, and there's this sort of black hole where we don't have any insight into what they're working on and what their other priorities are outside of my teams, let's say. So we don't have a sense of like, is this going to come back same day? Is this going to be 3 days? Is this going to be 5 days? So visibility, but also like shortening that sales cycle. Colin, from your perspective, using some of the automation features of the contract management platform, like what are those analytics telling you? So you told us you can track how long it takes from start to finish of a contract negotiation. How are you using that analytics today? What are you doing with that?
Sure. So, one of the things that it allows you to kind of take a look at is, what particular clauses and things are slowing things or elongating the sales process. And so you can that can be a signal to someone like me, for example, that, hey, you might want to take a look at this language and see why, what's in it, what's tricky about it, what can be done to make it a little more accommodating, which may require either, providing a clearer and better backup or fallback language, or changing the clause itself and allowing for it to be clearer. I mean, the other thing I think you also have to recognize is there are certain times when certain provisions are just going to take a little more time to negotiate anyway, because that's just the nature of the beast. But that being said, even with those provisions, that are taking time, you can track and see how changing them can allow for a faster process, because you're just clarifying the language, you're making it faster, you're allowing for easier, more effective compromise language that hits at what often is the pain point. And the other thing you can also do with data is you can see sort of, how long does it take to kind of get approval, or what, typical issues are there that, can be hangups either on the customer side or on your side. So there are things you can do to ensure that whatever you can control, you're taking full advantage of to allow for a quicker sales process. Again, you have to recognize that, there are things you can control and things you can't control, but focusing on what you can control can be very useful. And the way you do that is with these data analytic tools.
And how often are you auditing? So how often are you pulling this data to say, hey, let's do a contract review? Let's look at what was most commonly negotiated. Is that something you're doing fairly often?
So I mean, I've been doing this for so long for so many different companies that I don't often have to necessarily do kind of a real thorough audit because I kind of just automatically recognize what is taking a while. But I do check the data just to see if my intuition is right, and also
Yeah.
again look at the contracts and see kind of what's commonly been changed and what I can possibly do to make it easier or faster. So, certainly I would say I don't do it often, but I do it,
When you
maybe quarterly or every other quarter, something like that. Just to ensure that things are aligned. At prior companies, I did it more often because I just, wanted to ensure that because I couldn't track it, I want to ensure that what I thought was happening really was happening.
And the good thing now is you've got a business case to make to the business to say, hey, here's the number of times it's coming up. I can definitively say this is something that needs to be changed.
Right. And so that's one of the key themes I think about using data, especially having a legal function use data,
Yeah.
is oftentimes people are kind of wondering, well, I know that, you're a legal department and you're lawyers and you're doing stuff, but I don't really have any insight into what you're doing or why you're doing it or whatever.
Yeah.
And the problem is they're often not speaking the language of business. The language of business is data and numbers. So the more you can put that kind of information at the fingertips of the legal function, the better, I think, integration and alignment there will be between the legal function and these other functions.
Yeah.
And having the right tools in place to allow for that can be really, really game changing. And CLM, CRM working together, I think, is kind of a match made in heaven oftentimes.
Thank you, Colin. Channa, how are you tracking today? Do you know, are you supporting your contracts team in tracking, what are commonly negotiated clauses? How often is it coming up? And then how are you working with them to make recommendations to the business?
So it's funny. So I think that everyone on RevOps actually it's like a rite of passage. I've looked at all of our customer contracts, and so is the majority of my team now. So we are the contracts team outside of our legal person. In terms of how we're leveraging the contracting information, it's been helpful to understand how we're selling or how our reps are selling the value and how they're selling our products and being able to then implement that into the process. So if we're selling products a certain way in the contracts, it's different than how you understand how they're selling it on calls and the value in their presentations. And so it's been helpful to kind of marry both of them and then aligning that across the board.
And then how are you using that, or how are you making changes? Maybe, Chen, are you looking at that information regularly to make changes? Or is it sort of your contracts have stayed pretty status quo over time?
So we actually track our price elasticity for our customer base to be able to understand how we're selling to our customers and using the contract information. The other thing I was thinking about is being able to be proactive about how we're automating our renewal options. And so off the bat for our renewals, we want to be able to send out 3 options even before the renewal. So having that there, and so that takes away some of that burden of having to wait for a contract because they will be available, and then having the reps only focus on the contracts that need some personalization or personal touch in the process once they start to renew those customers. And then the second is splitting the process for approvals. And so we talked about the order form approval, but at the same time, they are getting red lines back with our legal team for approval, and then separately the implementation in the SOW approval process, and then using Salesforce quotes to be able to not approve the drafts for those types of quotes, but then also approving and looking at our deal desk approval process, right? So did we approve that request for these customizations and how they're looking at contracts?
That's great. Thank you. So just a reminder for the audience, if there's any questions, we're happy to take them now. Please drop them in the chat, Q&A. Feel free if anything's sort of burning. Colin and Channa, in wrapping today, I want you to take a minute and think about, we've covered so many interesting topics. So I'd love for you to give 1 or 2 pieces of advice that you'd give the audience that they can take away today. So again, thinking about Q4 being such a busy time where most companies are negotiating contracts, renewals, etc. Chan, I don't know if you want to start. What's one sort of takeaway from everything that we've discussed today, or even something new that the audience should take with us?
I think it would be ensuring that you're aligning the process with the number of stakeholders internally, right, that you have to get through for approval process, and ensuring that matches the experience you want potential customers to have, because if, that is like their first experience as they come on board as a customer, making sure that you can provide that value that you're looking to do.
Colin, thoughts from you?
So I have a couple thoughts.
Yeah.
One is when you are thinking about contracting, I think it's important to understand that it's more than just the legal department. The legal department is the one that certainly, drafts the contracts and negotiates in part the agreements. But there are other parts of it too. There's IT, there's privacy, there's finance. So I think it's really important to understand the contract document is a legal document. The contracting function, though, is a cross-functional exercise. And with that kind of perspective, then I think you can start evaluating kind of what your lay of the land is in terms of existing processes and tools, and then see perhaps what it needs adjusting, whether it's processes, whether it's tools, whether it's some combination of the two, with sort of in the back of your head, understanding that really the ultimate goal of aligning people and process is making better use of data and allowing for better getting data out of your agreements and getting data analytics. And I think that's really where we're going to see things going for the foreseeable future. And I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. So those would be, I think, the 2 points I would leave the audience with at this point.
That's great, Colin. A question has come in from the audience. Thank you, Sydney, for being our first brave audience member to send a question. Super interesting question. So how are you tracking versioning of your contracts? So including order form, do you version every change? And how would a CLM assist in that? So maybe Channa, if you want to start, and then Colin can chime in with the CLM piece. So how are you versioning or tracking versions today of the order forms or terms that come in?
So we track it by just the executed contracts and renewals. In terms of like before that happens, I think it's a kind of a free for all. Sometimes we're tracking it if we're drafting it, but if it doesn't go anywhere, it's not going to be versioned into a Salesforce.
And then once you're actively in with the legal team, how are you tracking them back and forth? Is that just sort of manually?
So that is done through a Word doc and versioning that way in the tracking.
Yes, as well. Colin, tell us how you're doing it and then how the CLM sort of works as it relates to versioning.
Right. So the great thing with many CLMs, including Malbec Solution, and I love this feature, it just makes my life so much easier, is it allows you to create and work on different versions. So you can have one initial version that is perhaps your template sent out, comes back with red lines, that's a new version. And then you create it, and then through the system, you can create another version that is your responses to those red lines. And you can track sort of version 1, version 2, version 3. And if something went wrong or someone made a mistake, you can go back to a previous version, and it's all tracked through the system. So there's no worrying about, final version, final version, not final version, final version, I promise, all that stuff that we've all seen firsthand. It can be a little bit of a nightmare. And perhaps I've lost a few hairs over the years because of that. But I'm keeping on to the ones that I have, thanks to Malbec. So, I think versioning is often the pain, is the bane of many people's existences in contracting. And the good news with a CLM solution is it should allow you to version control in the system and create a version, and you can kind of even label it in terms of, our response to red lines or customers' red lines or what have you. So you can kind of really see exactly what has happened and who last worked on it, which makes the whole version thing far less painful, much more organized, which is really, really helpful. So Sydney, to your point, to your question, quite frankly, whatever document you're working on, you can create new versions and therefore track it within the system. So you're not tracking emails and Word versions or what have you. Everything is documented within the solution.
Colin, this is probably a good time to like pick your brain a little bit on the actual workflow of what that looks like. So let's say an AE receives a Redline copy. Do they upload it directly into the CRM, into your Malbec platform? Do they email it? What happens to the actual?
So ideally what will happen is if the customer will send us back through email their Redline, and then the sales rep or whomever will upload it to the system, and the system will recognize it as a Redline and create a new version. And then I go in, I get notified, and I go in and review it, and then tag other people that I need to, meaning I can actually tag them by name and say, hey, so-and-so, I need you to look at this provision, or I have a question. What do you think about this, or what have you? So that's kind of how it works. So it is automated for the most part, and I get notifications automatically from the system notifying me that, hey, a new Redline came in, or or something, or even when something's done and finalized, this is moved into active stage, meaning I'm out of it and we're now working off of the terms because everything's been signed and agreed to. So that's really helpful.
And I'm assuming you can also manage all of your commercial terms in there, not just legal.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Any terms, doesn't matter. I mean, the whole point of this type of solution is that you've got sales team members that can work on it. You've got myself, finance, whomever can go in and provide their commentary and edit. So, it's really not just a tool for legal impact. I would say if legal is only using it, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. So everyone gets to have input.
Exactly.
We have another question from Zach. Do you recommend splitting up order forms from their respective MSA or terms? They're very closely tied together, but typically go through two different negotiation workflows. Or is it simpler to focus on one doc that includes both? So maybe, again, we'll start with the CLM perspective, and then, Chana, I'd love to get your thoughts as well.
So I love this question, Zach. This is a question I've thought about probably more often than most people should. My answer to it is that I do think that order forms are better often split apart from the MSA, because the order form is kind of a distinct beast on its own. It has the financing terms usually. It has kind of what services are being bought and sort of the payment term, whatever, net 30, whatever. So, I've seen it done both ways, and, our solution can certainly handle it as a part of the overall agreement, but I've also seen it done separately. And I think oftentimes it may be better to be done as a separate thing, because there is a different, many companies have a different workflow for it. So that can be helpful, in a solution like ours typically can handle that and it's good with it. So I do think that, if you have different workflows, setting up two different workflows, go for it. There shouldn't really be much of an issue there. And I should say, Zach, I'm happy to talk through more of it with you or anyone, frankly, if they have any questions that we haven't answered here.
Chana, maybe I'd love your input thinking about your sort of a bit more manual process today and going through Salesforce. Do you typically do order forms have a separate, do they have a separate workflow to your T's and C's or your terms?
So we do. So we reference our standard one, but if there are custom red lines for MSA or anything unique to that customer, what we do is we'll then actually just point to the custom MSA for the customer. And the reason why we actually do that too is when we think about renewals. So normally, you're renegotiating contracts based on usage or value, right, or increase or decreasing their products. But what you can do then is continue to use the same MSA that you've agreed to decrease the length of time that you're negotiating the contract for renewals. And so we've split it for two purposes. One is being able to track standard versus custom MSAs, and then not having to renegotiate each and every renewal, the MSA as well.
That's really helpful. Even at Lupio, we generally tend to have separate workflows. Our order forms come out typically from our CPQ, so we have limited ability to change those. They're pretty standard. And then our, of course, terms and conditions or MSA, we're much more flexible on. So I think that's different. Any other questions before we bring Angelica back out? We appreciate everyone who asked questions. Thank you so much, Sydney and Zach, and to these two great panelists.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And thank you, Shanna, Colin, and Michelle for this amazing session today. Again, just a reminder, this recording and key takeaways will be made available on the MSP website. Also, Melbeck is hosting a product demo on CLM next week, December 14th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. To sign up, I'm going to drop the link there. It is a free demo, so definitely check them out. Again, thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you at the next event. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.